Sometimes the cure a billionaire needs isn't in the plans of experts. Richard Caldwell had money, power, and a mansion full of silence. His son Ethan stopped laughing after the accident, and no specialist could bring joy back. Then a homeless girl with a broken guitar slipped into their lives. She danced in the rain, and for the first time in months, Ethan smiled. At a banquet filled with wealth and pride, Richard faced a choice: protect his image or protect his son. What happened next shocked every guest and changed their family forever. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, share these videos with others, and help spread stories of hope and faith. A late October rain drifted over Manhattan like a gray veil, softening the hard geometry of Fifth Avenue and turning taxi roofs into small moving mirrors. Inside the wrought iron gates of a limestone mansion near the edge of Central Park, the weather pressed itself to the windows in a steady, whispering tap that made the rooms seem larger, emptier, and colder than they already were. The house, three townhouses joined long ago into one private kingdom, held the sort of hush money can buy, the muffled hush of soundproofed glass and thick carpets, of climate control that hummed as softly as breath, of a staff trained to move like well-oiled hinges. In the center of this orchestrated quiet stood Richard Caldwell, a white American man of 45, whose height and square-shouldered frame filled a doorway the way a serif anchors a page. He had the kind of face a camera likes in business magazines, a square jaw guided by an almost architectural chin, a straight nose, cheekbones that gave you the sense of self-discipline even when he said nothing, and eyes, a flat, steady blue that could be stern without much effort. His hair, dark brown cut with a conservative hand and already salted at the temples, was always parted neatly, as if a line on a blueprint had been laid along his scalp. He dressed the way high-end consultants advise billionaires to dress when they want to look like they aren't trying. A navy suit that cost as much as a used sedan, a charcoal overcoat tailored at the waist, a silk tie the color of midnight, and a watch that did not shout its value but let you suspect it. If you met him on a day like this, you might describe his expression as composed. If you met him the week of a merger, you might call it armored. He had become wealthy by building and then acquiring. A software platform that quietly underlaid other people's software, an infrastructure of the invisible, a business premised on making other businesses run as smoothly as the climate system in his home. The merger pending now, the one filling the margins of his thoughts like gray water, would be his largest a consolidation that would move the Caldwell name up indices and into business school case studies. It absorbed him because it rewarded the part of him he trusted most, the part that believed numbers were a safe country, predictable and loyal to effort, the part that feared he wasn't when the subject was anything messier than a balance sheet. Down the corridor from the foyer, the library held the only noise in the house that was not mechanical. The faint, irregular click of a wheelchair's brakes settling and the rustle of a page turned with careful fingers. Ethan Caldwell, 10 years old, white, small for his age, with the kind of fineness in his bones that makes you think of porcelain, sat at the oversized table because he liked the height of it, the way the wood made him feel steadied. His blonde hair, cut short but forever drifting forward in an unruly fringe, fell in soft commas over a forehead currently pale from too much indoor light. The blue of his eyes was lighter than his father's. People said they were his mother's eyes, and sometimes, when a wordless thought passed through them, you could see a resemblance that was not just in color, but in warmth. He wore a light gray cotton t-shirt under a navy cardigan and khaki pants with soft seams that didn't chafe. His sneakers were the smallest size the brand made in a grown-up style, and the wheelchair beneath him, sleek, silver black, low to the ground, the wheels quick to respond, was the sort that announced design had met compassion halfway and they had shaken hands. Ethan was paralyzed on his left side from the waist down. A spinal injury from a car crash the previous winter had redrawn the map of his body, and he moved now in careful arcs, measuring space with the precision of someone who must plan not to fall. He turned pages slowly because the slowness let him pretend he was deciding, not compensating. He had become quieter in the months since the accident. Where once he had been a boy who ran until breath itself was a game, now he was a boy who listened to the corners of rooms. He had a good nature by instinct, but had found, lately, that smiles required summoning. The staff respected him with the kind of gentleness adults reserve for children who have seen too much too early. Sarah Whitfield, house manager, 42, white, tall and willow straight, with a posture shaped by years of ballet lessons she never talks about, stood in the breakfast room looking down the long corridor toward the library, a tray in her hands carrying tea, a glass of water, and the small bowl of sliced strawberries Ethan liked. Sarah had the sort of narrow, intent face that looks serious even at rest. Her hazel eyes carried a watchfulness that could, in softer light, be mistaken for worry. She wore a navy shirtwaist dress and flat shoes that let her move fast without seeming to. A thin gold wedding band sat on her finger, though she had been divorced for 6 years. And sometimes, when she forgot to school her features, regret crossed them like a shadow. She had worked for families that wanted a house to perform like an opera, but what kept her here was not the money. It was Ethan and the way his gaze reminded her of her younger brother, gone now, who had spent a summer in a wheelchair after a tree-climbing dare went wrong, and who had taught her the infinite patience of helping someone stand. If Sarah had a flaw, it was that she liked to fix things, even people, and that compulsion had made her miss warning signs in her own marriage until it was too late. "Your tea," she said softly at the library door, because loudness felt like a trespass here. Ethan lifted his head and nodded, the careful politeness he used with adults he did not want to burden. "Thank you." His voice was thin but steady. "Would you like me to stay?" "No, it's okay." He glanced at the rain as if it were a visitor he needed to see off. Sarah placed the tray and withdrew, and in the withdrawing she passed Richard, who had come down the corridor looking at a suite of alerts on his phone the way sailors once studied the wind. "He's reading?" Richard asked without looking up. "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "The Hardy Boys." Number 5. "Good," Richard answered, as if reading were a protocol complied with. He continued toward his office. Sarah watched his back for a moment, then straightened the edge of a rug that did not need straightening. There were others in the house who moved around the edges of these lives. Thomas Avery, the driver, 51, white, compact, and square-chested, with a face browned by old summers on Long Island, waited in the garage beside the black sedan, checking a sports score on his phone and pretending he did not keep a weather eye on the clock that told him when to start the car, so that it would be warm the instant the boss's hand reached the door handle. Thomas had been a firefighter once, until a knee injury and a divorce pushed him out of that life. He carried himself with the steady competence of men who still count exits and always sit facing the door. He liked Ethan and thought, privately, that the boy needed a friend who didn't work here. Upstairs, Mrs. Leona Price, the nurse 56, black, broad-shouldered and soft-voiced, with iron-gray hair pinned in tidy coils, set out the afternoon therapy schedule, penciling times into a neat grid with the slow joy of someone who trusts order to keep fear at bay. She'd been a pediatric rehab nurse for 3 decades. She'd seen miracles, and she'd seen stubbornness mistaken for courage, and she knew the difference. Leona had a way of speaking to Ethan that made him feel addressed, not managed. She kept butterscotch candies in her pocket and a strictness in her tone when safety was in question. "It's going to rain all day," she said to herself, looking out at the dripping terrace. Good. Rain keeps the world honest. In the kitchen, Baxter, a brindle rescue dog of uncertain lineage and certain loyalty, 6 years old, medium build, one ear that never stood upright, lay snoring softly on a mat beside the back door, the damp weather rendering him heavy with sleep. He wasn't supposed to be in the main rooms during formal hours, but rules in houses like this often had footnotes when the rule had 4 paws. Baxter had found Ethan after the accident the way dogs find their way to the person who needs them most. He patted at the wheels of the chair and set his chin on the boy's knee with a sigh that sounded like sympathy. Richard claimed to be indifferent to the dog, and then made sure the vet visited twice as often as necessary. The day arranged itself into the shape days often took here. Richard in his office with 2 screens and an internal clock calibrated to boardrooms 3 time zones away. Staff performing a choreography that resulted in things appearing where you needed them, just when you needed them. Therapy at 2. A call with the physical medicine doctor at 4, and a dinner that would be plated beautifully and eaten quietly. The only variable was the weather, and even that was the sort of rain that simply renewed its own argument. Richard's office was a clean geometry of dark wood and oblong light, a place in which nothing was sentimental except a single framed photo on the shelf behind his chair. It was a picture of Ethan at 7 with Emma, his mother, on a carousel in Central Park. The boy's hair lit so brightly he looked like he was made of some soft mineral. Emma's smile in the photo had the warmth of a person who trusted the future like a friend who will keep showing up. After the accident, Richard had removed most of the photographs because he could not stand the arithmetic of then versus now. This one remained because he could not bring himself to take it down. When the meeting with London ended, and then the meeting with San Francisco, and then the call with a lawyer whose gentle voice suggested he had been trained to talk to people at cliff's edges, Richard stood and looked out the window at the rain's persistence. He told himself that work was the place where he did not fail, that the merger's exacting steps were a proof of worth not subject to luck or loss. He recognized, with the same clarity a number on a sheet brings, that he had been avoiding the places where comprehension did not help. His son's room at night when fear rose like a fever, the sound of the wheelchair's brakes, the patience it took to help someone put on socks without haste or humiliation. It was easier to tell himself that specialists would carry them, that money had been invented for the purpose of outsourcing suffering. When Sarah knocked 2 polite taps, he felt the small tightening around his ribs that meant he was about to be asked to be what he did not feel like being. Yes? Ethan's therapist called, she said. Leona spoke with her. The 2 o'clock session will move to 3 due to the weather. There's also a note from school, he repeated, as if it were a country whose visa had expired. They'd like to schedule a conference about social reintegration. Social reintegration, he said, and the phrase sounded to him like a white paper written by people who did not know what it was to sit alone and try not to cry where anyone could hear. He nodded. Have my assistant put it on the calendar. Of course. Sarah hesitated. Her job description did not include hesitating. Sir? Yes? He's quieter today. The rain helps sometimes, but he's quieter. Richard smoothed a non-existent wrinkle in his tie. We're all quieter when it rains. Yes, sir, Sarah said, and left before she said more than her job allowed. If Richard heard the plea coded into her observation, he did not show it. At lunch, he tried. He sat at the end of the long table across from his son and let Leona's easy competence anchor the room. Ethan ate a few strawberries and half a sandwich, Baxter alert on the floor beside him for any mercy in the form of crumbs. Richard asked about the book. What was the mystery this time? Did the boys have bicycles? Which character Ethan liked best? And Ethan answered politely, but his voice had the careful shape of a boy who fears that any answer might earn him a test he cannot pass. Leona filled the silence by describing the plan to strengthen Ethan's core muscles, to help the right side compensate for the left, to build endurance until transfers from chair to bed became less of a production and more of a process. Richard nodded at all the right moments and pictured a Gantt chart. After lunch, the house resumed its quiet, staff on soft patrol, the rain a metronome, the afternoon pulled forward by the weight of habit. In the library, Ethan set the book aside and rolled to the window. The park beyond the trees blurred into a watercolor of umbrellas. He traced a circle of condensation with his finger and then another inside it, private math to stave off the restlessness that sometimes arrived like static. He was not angry with his father. Anger took too much heat, and he felt cool most of the time now, as if his blood were diluted by caution. He wanted something he could not name. He wanted the door of the house to open and for the outside air to bring him a surprise he could keep. He lowered his gaze to the dog. "We should name you Detective," he whispered to Baxter, "because you always know where the clues are." Baxter thumped his tail as if in agreement. Richard, back in his office, reviewed a draft of remarks for the evening's call with institutional investors. He crossed out a phrase, unlocking synergistic value, because he hated saying things he wouldn't say to a smart friend. He wrote instead, "We build tools that let other people build." He paused, pen in air, because the sentence sounded like something Emma would have approved of. He set the pen down and allowed himself, for the space of a breath, to remember her voice. Then he folded the memory away with the same practiced care he used to fold pocket squares. The day lifted its chin toward 3 o'clock. Therapy would begin. Leona would guide Ethan to the mats. Stretches would be measured in counts of 10. The new technique would be attempted and then attempted again. Thomas would bring the car around at 5. The call would start at 6. The house would go on being a house. Outside, the rain went on being rain. Inside, every room did its appointed work. The kitchen saved smells, the library saved quiet, the office saved control. In the stillness between appointments, the mansion wore its wealth like armor and like absence, both at once, the way a person can be both present and somewhere else entirely. And in that stillness, Ethan's laughter did not arrive. It had been months since it had. The sound of it, when it existed, stored itself in the house like a rumor of summer. For now, the rooms held their breath and waited, as if houses could learn hope by imitation. The chapter of this day closed not with event, but with the shape of a truth. The billionaire kept to his merger as if it were a lifeboat. The boy kept to his quiet as if quiet were safer than wishing. And the weather, faithful to itself, kept to rain. The rain had not eased by late afternoon. It had deepened into that soaking sort of drizzle New Yorkers call a steady mist, where streets run slick and shoes betray you. The lamps along Fifth Avenue were beginning to hum against the gray, their halos smeared across windshields. In the Caldwell mansion, the light from the library windows cut into the garden like pale squares on wet stone. The garden itself, a carefully landscaped stretch of trimmed hedges, rose beds now soggy, and a wrought iron bench polished more by weather than use, had always been ornamental, meant to be seen rather than inhabited. Yet on this particular day, the garden received an uninvited guest. Amara Johnson was 13 years old and bore the mark of the city on her posture. Alert shoulders, a gait quickened by caution, an instinct to make herself small in places she did not belong. She was black, with slender arms that moved like ribbons when she danced, and legs wiry from both hunger and resilience. Her hair was a cloud of tight curls, often tied up high but never quite contained, some strands forever escaping as if to prove her spirit's refusal to be boxed in. Her skin was a warm, rich brown that glistened when the rain touched it, and her eyes, large, amber-dark, quick to catch every movement, were windows where hope and weariness wrestled daily. She wore jeans faded not by fashion but by time, the knees worn pale, and sneakers with soles beginning to fray. Over her thin t-shirt she had layered a hoodie 2 sizes too big, once maroon, now dulled to the color of dried cherries. Across her back she carried an object that seemed both anchor and sail. A wooden guitar, small-bodied, with a cracked soundboard and strings so loose that every note was half sigh, half cry. The guitar had belonged to her mother, a woman who had sung lullabies in a soft contralto until pneumonia stole her voice forever 3 winters ago. Since then, Amara had carried the instrument like a relic, plucking at it when the city pressed too hard, striking its sides like a drum when rhythm alone could keep her moving. On this wet afternoon, she had darted through a break in the gate left unlatched by a gardener who hurried away before the storm, and found herself in the Caldwell garden. The stone bench gleamed wet, the hedges darkened with water, but she did not mind. Rain was not her enemy. It hid her, softened the outlines of her trespass. She set the guitar on her lap, tapped its body with her palms to summon a beat, then rose to her feet, letting her arms sweep outward, her legs pivot and twist in movements learned partly from YouTube glimpses in library computers, partly from instinct, partly from the memory of her mother dancing in the kitchen with a wooden spoon as baton. From the second-floor library, Ethan Caldwell's chair had rolled closer to the window. He was not supposed to lean forward, but curiosity overcame rules. His pale fingers rested against the sill, and his blue eyes widened as he took in the sight below. A girl, drenched and yet undeterred, spinning slowly in the rain, her hoodie clinging to her back, her feet splashing silently, her guitar making dull, percussive thuds that somehow still carried rhythm. Ethan had not laughed in months, not since the accident carved silence into his days. But something in the absurd grace of it, the stubborn joy of her defiance against the weather, pulled a sound from him now. It was not a full laugh at first, more like the break of a dam letting water trickle, but it startled him so much he placed a hand to his chest, as if confirming it had been his own. Inside the mansion, Sarah Whitfield, the house manager, was walking down the hall balancing a folded set of fresh towels when she heard it. The boy's laugh, faint and high, almost disbelieving. She stopped. For a moment she thought it a memory, but when she turned toward the library and saw Ethan at the window, eyes bright and lips still parted in that rare curve, she nearly dropped the towels. Sarah had not heard him laugh since before the winter accident. Her hazel eyes pricked with tears, and she whispered, "Thank God," though she was not a woman who often spoke to God anymore. Amara was unaware of her audience. She closed her eyes and twirled, her sneakers sliding over slick stone. She imagined, as she often did, a crowd that cheered rather than jeered, a stage instead of wet cobblestones, her mother's claps rising above it all. Her stomach had been empty since yesterday morning, but hunger lost its grip when rhythm filled her. The guitar, battered as it was, became an orchestra beneath her palms. The drizzle seeped through her hoodie until it felt heavy as a quilt. Still she danced. To stop was to feel cold, and she preferred heat, even if it came from movement alone. Somewhere in her chest a hope whispered, maybe if she danced long enough the world would see her. Inside the mansion, Leona Price, the nurse, passed by the corridor and caught sight of Ethan laughing. Her broad face softened. She pressed a hand to her heart. She did not see what he saw, only the evidence of joy's return. For Leona, that was miracle enough. But Ethan wanted to keep watching. He raised his hand and tapped the glass, softly at first, then harder, hoping she might look up. The sound was swallowed by rain. Still, he tapped. Amara paused mid-spin, her eyes darting. She lifted her gaze toward the mansion and caught the faint outline of a boy framed by the glowing square of the window. For a second, fear tightened her shoulders. Being seen meant being chased. But when she noticed his smile, small, crooked, not mocking her, fear eased into curiosity. She gave a shy half-bow, then strummed a broken chord on her guitar, the noise clashing against rain but still carrying intention. Ethan's smile widened. He pressed his palm to the window as if to say, "Again." Amara, puzzled but emboldened, tapped the guitar's body, let the beat rise, and resumed her dance. Elsewhere in the house, Richard Caldwell had retreated from a conference call, his expression stormier than the sky. His phone buzzed with messages about projections and valuations. He poured himself coffee, black and unsweetened, then walked toward his office. Passing by the library, he glimpsed his son at the window, animated in a way he hadn't been for months. Richard slowed. His stern face, usually locked in boardroom neutrality, showed a flicker of confusion, then suspicion. He stepped closer and followed his son's gaze. There, in his private garden, was a girl who did not belong, a trespasser. She was soaked, disheveled, clutching a ruined guitar and whirling like some street performer who had lost her subway platform. Richard's jaw tightened. His instinct, born from years of guarding what was his, was to summon security, end the intrusion, restore order. But before he could speak, Ethan laughed again, fuller this time, spilling out into the room like music. The sound arrested Richard. He had not heard it in nearly a year. He watched his son's eyes sparkle, watched him tap his small hand against the glass in rhythm with the girl below. Something in him, a father's instinct long buried under deals and documents, quivered. He said nothing. He turned away, though his heart carried the echo of that laugh. In the garden, Amara danced until her breath grew ragged. Finally, she slumped onto the bench, hugging her guitar close. its wood damp, its strings buzzing faintly. She tilted her head back and let the rain wash her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined she was home again, her mother humming beside her. Then, hearing no footsteps of security, she dared another glance up at the window. The boy was still there, smiling, watching her as if she were not a mistake in his garden, but something invited. From the kitchen door, Baxter the dog padded into the garden. The brindle mutt shook water from his coat and ambled curiously toward the bench. Amara startled, clutching her guitar as if it could shield her, but Baxter wagged his tail in that disarming way dogs do, as if declaring neutrality. He sniffed her sneaker, then leaned his damp head against her knee. Amara laughed softly, the sound foreign in her throat after so much silence. She scratched his ear. "Hey there, detective," she whispered, not knowing that was the same secret name Ethan had already given him. The dog thumped his tail, sealing a pact only children and dogs understand. Above, Ethan's mouth formed words she could not hear, but she read them by instinct. Thank you. She did not know why. She only knew that in this lonely city, for one strange moment, she was not invisible. The rain persisted, but inside the mansion something had cracked open. Ethan had laughed. Sarah whispered it to Leona. Leona whispered it to Thomas when he returned with the car. Thomas shook his head, grinning as if a small victory had been won against the gloom. And Richard, though he pretended not to notice, carried that laugh with him into the sterile glow of his office, where it unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever could. The chapter closed with the girl in the garden, the boy at the window, and the dog as their bridge, the rain drumming the roof as if marking the beat of a song only they could hear. The next morning broke with reluctant light. The storm of the previous day had washed the city clean, leaving a thin silver film on rooftops and turning Central Park into a quilt of damp greens and browns. From the Caldwell mansion, the skyline was visible in fragments, a cathedral spire in one direction, the crown of a high-rise in another, all softened by a veil of early mist. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and burnt toast. Thomas the driver had tried to use the staff toaster in the garage lounge and failed again. Richard Caldwell sat at the breakfast table dressed in a pinstriped suit of steel gray, his tie a disciplined Windsor knot, his face set in lines of quiet calculation. His phone buzzed with a steady rhythm of emails about merger valuations, stockholder anxieties, and a newly emerging competitor. His eyes scanned but did not really read. The real numbers, the ones that mattered, were already carved into his head. Yet there was another sound, faint, nagging, breaking through his mental fortress. The sound of music, if you could call it that. It was not the polished sound of a Steinway in the parlor, nor the programmed jazz on his dining speakers. It was the hollow thump of wood struck by a child's palm, the buzz of loose guitar strings hit with more faith than skill. And beneath it, laughter. His son's laughter, startling, bubbling, as if something inside had found a crack and escaped. Richard stiffened. He rose abruptly, leaving half his coffee cooling in the cup, and strode toward the sound. His shoes clicked against marble until a carpet swallowed them. In the grand living room, with its high ceilings and chandeliers designed to impress donors rather than warm families, Amara Johnson stood barefoot on the rug. Her soaked sneakers rested by the door, abandoned after the rain. She held her battered guitar against her hip, tapping its side in rhythm while Ethan, perched in his wheelchair, clapped along, his face alight with joy. For the first time in months, Ethan was not a quiet shadow in a chair. He was a boy again, alive in a game. His blonde hair fell into his eyes as he laughed, his thin arms moving out of rhythm but with determination. The chandelier's crystals caught fragments of his smile and scattered it across the room. Richard froze at the doorway, his blue eyes narrowing at the scene. The girl, this intruder, was in his house. She had crossed more than one line now. The gate, the garden, and finally the sanctum of his home. "Enough," Richard barked, his voice echoing against marble and gilt. Amara jolted as if struck. She clutched her guitar to her chest, her wide brown eyes darting to the floor. For all her defiance in the rain, she was still 13, still a child who knew what it was to be unwelcome. Ethan flinched. His small hands froze mid-clap. "Dad!" Richard strode into the room, his figure tall, dark-suited, unyielding. "Who is she?" "How did she get in?" His voice was not loud, but it carried that low, dangerous authority that made even staff step aside. Amara opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wanted to say she hadn't meant harm, that she only needed a roof for a moment, but the weight of his gaze pinned her words to her throat. Ethan's cheeks reddened. "She's my friend." His voice cracked with urgency. She was dancing, Dad. She made me laugh." Richard's jaw tightened. He turned to Sarah Whitfield, who had followed at a nervous distance. "Why is there a stranger in my house?" Sarah's hands, slender and pale, tightened on the notepad she carried. "Sir, I don't know how she entered. I found them only moments ago." It was not entirely true. Sarah had suspected the girl might come back, after seeing Ethan's joy at the window, but she had not stopped it. She feared Richard's wrath, yet her conscience told her a child's laughter was more sacred than any rule. Richard turned back to Amara. "You don't belong here." His voice was iron. "Whatever trick you're playing, whatever sympathy you're trying to pull, stop it. This is not a place for beggars or performers." Amara's lips trembled. Her pride told her not to cry, not in front of him, not in this cold palace. She clutched the cracked guitar tighter, as if her mother's spirit inside it could shield her. Then Ethan shouted a sound rawer than any his father had heard from him since the accident. Tears blurred his blue eyes. "Don't make her go! Please, Dad, don't. She makes me happy. You never—" His voice broke into sobs, the kind that bent his thin shoulders and shook his fragile frame. Baxter, the brindle dog, had been dozing by the hearth. Now he rose, ears cocked, tail stiff, padding forward to stand between Ethan's chair and Richard, as if defending the boy's tears. His coat gleamed with amber and black in the chandelier light, and his gaze, though canine, seemed to accuse. "Listen to him." Richard's hand flexed at his side. He hated disorder, hated the sight of tears that could not be negotiated away. He hated more that his son had accused him without finishing the sentence. "You never what? Never laugh, never play, never care." "Ethan," Richard said, quieter now, though still stern, "she cannot stay. She doesn't belong to this life. You don't know her." "I don't care," Ethan sobbed. "I know she's kind." "She makes me forget the chair. Doesn't that matter?" The staff had gathered discreetly at the edges. Leona, tall and broad, her dark eyes burning with restrained judgment. Thomas, his driver's cap in hand, shaking his head slightly. None dared speak, but the weight of their silence pressed Richard further. Amara finally found her voice. It was small but steady. "I didn't mean trouble, sir. I just needed a place to stay dry." "I didn't think anyone would mind." She swallowed, her eyes glinting with both fear and defiance. "I only wanted to dance." "That's all I know how to do." Her words, simple as they were, carried something Richard did not expect. Honesty without agenda. She was not asking for money, not even for pity, just a chance to exist. Still, his instincts screamed at him. This was intrusion, weakness, danger. His world had no room for strangers from the street. His company depended on perfection. His reputation depended on control. And this girl was chaos. He pointed to the door. "Go." Ethan's cry was sharper now, desperate. "No!" His small fists pounded the arms of his wheelchair. His thin body shook with sobs. "If she goes, then I don't want—" He stopped, choking, but the unfinished sentence hung heavier than any finished one. The chandelier above seemed to tremble with the weight of silence. Sarah stepped forward, risking her position. Her voice was careful, respectful, but insistent. "Sir, forgive me, but I heard him laugh yesterday, because of her. It's the first time since the accident." Her hazel eyes softened with memory. "Maybe she's not a threat. Maybe she's a gift." Richard stared at her, astonished she would dare. His lips parted with the beginning of a rebuke, but he hesitated. He looked at Ethan, his son, trembling in tears, his face twisted with need, and then at the girl, soaked, poor, fragile, yet unbroken, holding on to a ruined guitar as if it were worth more than all the art on his walls. For a moment, Richard felt something dangerous stir inside him. Doubt. But he could not surrender to it, not yet. He turned on his heel, his voice clipped. This ends now. I won't allow chaos in my house. He strode out, leaving behind the echo of Ethan's sobs, the girl's stunned silence, and the staff's unspoken questions. Behind him, the mansion's coldness seemed deeper than before, though a single sound defied it still. The muffled strum of a broken guitar, trembling but unyielding. The days that followed the confrontation in the grand living room carried a new kind of tension inside the Caldwell mansion. Richard had forbidden Amara from returning, his voice sharp and his order final, yet the boy's sobs had lingered in the halls like the scent of smoke after a fire. Ethan grew quieter again, but this time the silence was not numb, it was pointed. A silence heavy with longing, with a child's stubborn will that even wealth cannot buy away. Richard noticed it each morning as he dressed, each night as he reviewed spreadsheets, and though he told himself it was temporary, a fissure had begun to creep into his certainty. Outside the walls of privilege, Amara Johnson's days stretched with their own battles. She had no room in which to retreat, only the corners of the city that tolerated her presence. She often slept beneath scaffolding near 96th Street, where the hiss of buses masked the sound of her shivers. Her hoodie had not dried properly since the storm, and each gust of autumn wind bit through the damp fabric until her bones ached. She hugged her guitar close, the cracked wood pressing into her ribs like a second heartbeat. It was her shield against loneliness and the only inheritance her mother had left her. One evening, as she tried to warm herself by striking a rhythm against the guitar body, a group of older boys emerged from the shadows of a bodega. They were city children too, but with harder edges, their laughter serrated, their sneakers new in a way that suggested other people had paid for them. "Play us a song, Princess of the Trash," one sneered, tall and thin with a baseball cap turned backward. His name was Dante, 17, a boy who had grown up one subway stop away but in a household so broken that cruelty became his currency. His jaw was sharp, his brown eyes restless, his smirk practiced. Amara pulled the guitar closer. "Leave me alone," she said, voice low but firm. Another, shorter and stockier with a scar across his cheek, laughed. "She thinks she's a star. Show us, dancer girl, or maybe we take that toy." They stepped closer, circling, the kind of casual menace born of boredom. Amara's heart raced, but she did not rise. She tapped the guitar body with her palm in a steady beat, forcing her hands not to tremble. "This guitar isn't for you," she said. "It's all I've got. Don't touch it." Her defiance caught them off guard for a moment. Then Dante reached out, fingers brushing the neck of the instrument. Before he could grab it, a voice rang out from the end of the alley. "Police patrol's coming this way," said a man pushing a cart stacked with aluminum cans. His name was Hector Rivera, a wiry Latino in his late 50s with a weathered face and eyes so tired they seemed carved from stone. He wore a knit cap pulled low, his gloves fingerless, his shoulders stooped from years of hauling weight that never translated into security. The boys swore, glanced at each other, and scattered into the night, their bravado dissolving as quickly as it had appeared. Amara exhaled, her shoulders sagging. She looked at Hector and managed a small smile. "Thank you." He waved it off. "Don't thank me. Thank their fear. They're not brave, only loud." His voice was gruff, tinged with Spanish cadence. Hector moved on, his cart rattling, but Amara carried the moment like a lifeline. Even in a city that often ignored her, there were still strangers who could shift the balance of danger. Still, she knew her situation was perilous. Word traveled quickly about kids like her alone, visible, vulnerable. The city had places for such children. Shelters, group homes, the dreaded social services offices. Amara had learned to avoid them. She feared that if she were taken into the system, her guitar would be stripped away, and with it, the last piece of her mother. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Ethan could not let her absence rest. He began to mimic the rhythms she had shown him that short afternoon, drumming his thin fingers against the armrest of his wheelchair, the tabletop, even the frame of his bed. The sound was small but insistent, like rain on glass. Sarah noticed first, watching as he tapped patterns while staring out the window. "You've got music in your hands," she said softly one evening as she tucked a blanket around his legs. Ethan shrugged, but the faintest smile tugged at his lips. "She taught me," he whispered. Sarah's heart ached. She wanted to tell Richard, to plead for leniency, but she knew the risk. Instead, she found a compromise. She left a notebook and pencil by Ethan's chair. "Write down the rhythms. That way they won't leave you, even if she can't come back." Ethan did as she suggested. Pages soon filled with crude drawings lines of taps, arrows for pauses, dots for accents. He could not notate music properly, but the sketches were enough for him to remember. His laughter returned in small bursts, surprising the staff during dinner, or spilling out when Baxter pawed in rhythm beside him. Richard observed these changes with conflicted eyes. He never asked directly, but he saw. He saw the notebook pages, the tapping fingers, the slight glow that returned to Ethan's cheeks, and he knew, without admitting it, that the source was the girl. One evening, after a draining call with London investors, Richard stepped into the hallway and heard it. The steady beat of hands drumming against wood, followed by a giggle that was pure and unguarded. He paused. He leaned against the doorframe of his son's room and watched as Ethan, head tilted, tapped a rhythm on his tray table while Baxter barked once in perfect counterpoint. The boy's eyes were brighter than Richard remembered, his small body moving to an invisible song. Richard's chest tightened. He wanted to be angry still, to declare the girl a problem, but what he saw was undeniable. His son was alive in a way he had not been since the accident. Later that night, when the mansion was quiet and the staff asleep, Richard poured himself a glass of scotch and sat in the library alone. He stared at the rain-streaked window, remembering the girl's face so young, so fierce, and the guitar, cracked and fragile like her. He did not want her in his world, but his world had already been breached. His son's smile was proof. In the city, Amara danced alone on a subway platform, strumming muted strings to keep warm. Her reflection in the dark tunnel glass looked older than her 13 years, eyes shadowed by fatigue, but when she spun, when she tapped the guitar, she still found herself. Passers-by gave her coins sometimes insults, but she kept moving, and in the mansion's quiet halls, the impossible grew. Ethan's joy stitched itself back together, thread by thread, guided by a rhythm taught in stolen minutes. Richard noticed. And though he told no one, a thought lodged itself in him like a seed. Perhaps the chaos he feared was not a threat, but a cure. The chapter closed there, Amara surviving the harshness of the streets, facing danger but clinging to her guitar, Ethan quietly practicing rhythms she had shown him, and Richard beginning, against his will, to sense the strange bond forming between them. The Caldwell mansion was rarely quiet when an event was scheduled. On the evening of the autumn shareholders' banquet, the house hummed with staff moving like currents under the surface. Outside, a fleet of black sedans lined the block, headlights glinting off wet pavement. The rain of the week had lifted, replaced by a sharp chill that made guests hurry across the portico in gowns and tuxedos, eager to escape the cold. Inside, the chandeliers blazed with gold. The marble floors gleamed, and a string quartet played soft background music near the staircase. Richard Caldwell wore a tuxedo tailored to precision, the fabric black as ink, the bow tie immaculately tied. He carried himself with the calm of a man accustomed to scrutiny, though inside, his thoughts pressed against each other like restless wolves. This evening was crucial. The merger was weeks away from finalization, and investors needed assurance that their captain was steady at the helm. He greeted guests with measured smiles, clasping hands, trading compliments with practiced ease. Near the edge of the grand hall sat Ethan in his wheelchair, dressed in a navy blazer, pressed khakis, and polished shoes that he rarely wore. His blonde hair had been combed carefully, but the strands still insisted on falling over his forehead. He looked small among the swirl of adults, though his eyes were alert. By his side sat Amara, allowed into the event only because Ethan had begged Sarah until she relented. She wore her hoodie cleaned and pressed by Leona over a simple black dress borrowed from the donations closet at the church where she sometimes slept. The dress fit loosely on her thin frame, but her eyes shone with a mixture of nerves and defiance. Her battered guitar rested against her chair like an old friend unwilling to miss the night. The presence of Amara among gowns and diamonds drew sidelong glances. She noticed them, felt them burn against her skin, but she lifted her chin. Ethan whispered, "Don't mind them. They don't know you." His voice carried a mixture of loyalty and steel rarely seen in 10-year-olds. At the far side of the room, a new character moved among the guests. Carolyn Whitmore, one of the largest shareholders, a woman in her late 50s with sharp cheekbones, auburn hair styled in an elegant bob, and eyes like polished steel. She wore a deep emerald gown and pearls that glowed under the chandelier. Carolyn was known for her ruthless precision in business and her impatience with sentiment. Rumor whispered that she had designs on Richard's position should the merger falter. She smiled at everyone, but it was the kind of smile that measured as it charmed. Sarah, dressed in a navy sheath dress, moved discreetly along the staff, her tall frame bending occasionally to whisper instructions. Her hazel eyes never strayed far from Ethan. She carried memories of her own childhood spent in silence after her brother's accident, and she could not shake the conviction that this boy's laughter must never be smothered again. The string quartet stopped playing, and the room shifted toward the dais where Richard was to give his welcome speech. He stepped forward, hands steady on the podium, voice clear as he spoke of growth, resilience, and the promise of the merger. Applause rose at each calculated pause, but when Richard turned to step down, he saw Ethan's hand lift timidly. "Dad?" The boy's voice carried just enough to hush a corner of the crowd. "Can Amara and I play something for everyone?" Richard froze. In the silence, whispers flickered among the guests. He felt Carolyn's gaze sharpen from across the room. He saw Amara clutching the old guitar, her face uncertain but ready. "No," Richard said firmly, his voice low but audible. He leaned down slightly toward his son. "This is not the place. These people are here for business, not performances." Ethan's eyes widened, hurt flashing across them. His small voice, trembling but fierce, rose above the murmur. "I'd rather have nothing at all than live in a world without music and friends." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the hall. Carolyn arched an eyebrow, her lips curving into the faintest smirk. Richard's jaw locked. The image he had built, control, precision, perfection, was crumbling before eyes that measured value in billions. But Ethan was not finished. He wheeled himself forward, his small hands gripping the rims of his chair, his movements unsteady but determined. The polished floor reflected the chandelier light as his chair rolled into the center of the hall. "Amara, come on!" he called, voice ringing with both fear and courage. Amara hesitated, then rose. Her old guitar clutched like a banner. She stepped beside him, her curls catching the golden light, her black dress swaying around her thin legs. She struck a chord. It buzzed, imperfect, raw but in its imperfection. The sound cut sharper than polished strings. She tapped the guitar body with her palm, creating rhythm, and began to hum a melody that her mother had once sung while cooking stew in a one-room apartment. Ethan clapped along, his hands finding the rhythm she had taught him, his face lit with joy, his laugh echoing across the room. The chandelier above seemed to vibrate with the beat. At first the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned, some whispered, but then the sight of the boy and the girl, two children daring to claim joy in a hall built for wealth, stilled them. Even the quartet watched silently, bows lowered. Richard stood at the dais, his heart torn. His son was in the spotlight, alive, radiant in defiance. The girl he had called an intruder was now the bridge between Ethan and happiness. But around him were shareholders, investors, and Carolyn's watchful eyes. His empire depended on order, on control, on an image unmarred by sentiment. The moment stretched taut. Richard knew this was not merely about music. It was about choice. Protect the image or protect his son. He had spent years building walls of marble and glass. Now a child's laughter and a broken guitar threatened to tear them down. The song continued uneven, trembling, but pulsing with life. Guests fell silent, their gazes locked on Ethan's smile, on Amara's fierce concentration. Sarah, watching from the side, felt tears prick her eyes. Leona crossed her broad arms and nodded once, as if to say, "Let the boy live." Carolyn, however, leaned toward another investor and whispered, her lips barely moving. The smirk never left her face. Richard inhaled, his breath heavy with fear and awe. For the first time in years, the choice before him was not about money but about love. The chapter closed there, with Ethan and Amara in the center of the hall, their fragile music holding the room hostage, and Richard standing on the edge of a decision that would define not only his company but his soul. The hall was still suspended in silence, the broken chords of Amara's guitar echoing against marble and crystal, Ethan's laugh carrying through the hush like a bright thread. Richard Caldwell stood rigid near the dais, his hand tightening around the edge of the podium, his pulse thundering against the careful walls he had built for years. Carolyn Whitmore's eyes gleamed like polished knives from across the room, the corners of her mouth curling in anticipation of his misstep. And yet, amid the measured glances and whispered doubts, there was one sound that would not be ignored: his son's joy. Richard stepped forward. The room seemed to inhale. His polished shoes struck the floor in deliberate rhythm until he reached the center of the hall where Ethan and Amara stood. He looked down at the girl, her black dress too loose, her curls damp with sweat, the battered guitar trembling in her hands. Then he looked at Ethan, whose small chest rose and fell with excitement, whose blue eyes shone not with fear, but with belief. Richard extended his hand. "May I?" His voice was low, but carried to the farthest corner. Amara blinked, startled. Ethan beamed and nodded furiously. "Yes, Dad, yes!" Richard took the guitar gently, strummed once, and winced at the uneven tone. Then he laughed, a short, surprised sound, rusty from disuse. He tapped the guitar body to match the beat Ethan clapped, and the three of them, Billionaire, son, and homeless girl, wove a fragile rhythm that filled the gilded hall with something purer than wealth. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the guests, then softened into applause. People leaned forward, eyes alight. Carolyn's smirk faltered, and then a voice rose above the clapping. An older man in a tailored midnight suit, with silver hair swept back and an accent thick from years in Paris. His name was Henri Duval, 70, founder of an international arts foundation. He had the kind of lined face that had seen both prophet and poetry, and his eyes glowed with sincerity. "This," Henri declared, "this is real power. Not the numbers, not the merger, this joy, this humanity. If your company invests in this, I will double my stake." Gasps flickered through the hall, followed by thunderous applause. Richard felt his chest loosen. For once, he had not chosen image over heart, and the world had not collapsed. It had expanded. Later, when the guests dispersed to champagne and dessert, Richard took the stage once more, his son by his side, Amara standing shyly with her guitar. He spoke without notes, his voice steadier than any speech he had given. "Tonight has shown me something I cannot ignore. Wealth means nothing if it builds only walls. It must build bridges. Therefore, I am founding the Amara Foundation, dedicated to giving homeless children and children with disabilities access to music and the arts. Because music belongs to everyone, not only to those who can afford it." The room erupted in applause. Sarah, standing at the edge of the hall, felt her hazel eyes sting with tears. Leona pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, "Finally." Even Thomas, stoic by nature, let out a long sigh of relief. Amara's lips parted in shock. She looked from Richard to Ethan, her brown eyes filling with disbelief. No one had ever spoken her name with such honor, carved into something lasting. She clutched her guitar tighter, as if to make sure she was not dreaming. In the days that followed, the mansion transformed. Contractors were not called, but laughter was the sound of Ethan clapping rhythms, Amara teaching him steps, Baxter barking in chaotic accompaniment. Richard found himself lingering in rooms he once avoided, watching his son wheel across carpets with energy, listening to Amara hum while sketching new melodies. The cold marble no longer echoed emptily. It vibrated with life. One afternoon, Ethan presented his father with a drawing. He had used Sarah's colored pencils, the lines uneven but full of intention. 5 stick figures stood beneath a sun, holding hands. Written above in shaky letters, "My new family, Dad, me, and Sister Amara with the old guitar." Richard's throat tightened as he studied it. That evening, after dinner, he gathered everyone in the library. His tuxedo had been replaced by a simple sweater and slacks, and his expression, though still firm, was gentler than the man who had once banished laughter. "I want to make this official," he said, his voice carrying a tremor that made the staff glance up. He turned to Amara. "You are already family here, but I want it to be true in name as well. If you would let me, I would like to adopt you." The room stilled. Amara's hands shook around her guitar. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears that spilled freely down her cheeks. "Me?" she whispered. "You mean me?" Ethan clapped his hands together, laughing in delight. "Yes, Amara, yes, say yes." Richard knelt, lowering himself to her level, his blue eyes steady. "You deserve more than the streets. You deserve a home. You deserve to belong," Amara sobbed, then nodded. "Yes, yes." Sarah turned away, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth, her tall frame trembling. Leona muttered a prayer of thanks, her broad shoulders shaking with emotion. Thomas cleared his throat loudly, muttering about dust in the air. Baxter barked once, as if sealing the contract. From that day forward, the mansion was no longer cold. It echoed with mismatched chords, with laughter, with the bark of a dog who considered himself conductor of their orchestra. And in the heart of it all sat a family that had been broken but was now whole, a billionaire who had learned to choose love, a boy who had reclaimed laughter, and a girl whose battered guitar had built them a bridge. The chapter ended as dawn broke one Sunday, light flooding the garden where once rain had hidden Amara's dance. Now she danced openly, her curls catching the sun, Ethan clapping in rhythm, Richard smiling not as a businessman but as a father. The house, once a fortress, had become a home. Sometimes the greatest wealth is not in numbers or success, but in the moments when we choose love over image, kindness over fear. Richard discovered that joy can be found in the most unexpected places, through a child's laughter and a broken guitar. In our own daily lives, maybe we can also pause, listen, and give room for love to grow where we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. And if you believe in the power of love and family, write amen in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of hope and inspiration. May God bless you and your loved ones always.